In this video, we're going to talk about how to create a surface ID texture map out of Modo. When we're texturing complex objects like this wine barrel here, it's important that we're able to accurately place specific texture images on very specific textures or very specific polygons over in Photoshop. Now, usually that's not a problem, but when we look at how this object is created, and more specifically how the UV map for this object is created, you're going to see a little bit of a problem. Now, the biggest problem comes in the form of these metal bands that run along the outside of my wine barrel. If you look closely at the way that this model is constructed, it is all one contiguous polygon, so they're all connected. If I double click on it, it selects everything except for these little rivets over here. Let's take a look at the UV map, and you'll begin to further see my little problem here. We have a gigantic UV island down here at the bottom that's all contiguous. It's all one piece. Now, I can kind of guess where on my UV island here that my metal bands live, just by looking at all the edges and their close proximity to each other. I can kind of make out some shapes here, but I don't like guessing. I want to know precisely where all these bands exist in my UV island, because I want to be able to precisely place a metal texture on top of these polygons in my UV islands in Photoshop. So this whole process of creating a surface ID map is really aimed at giving us some accuracy over in Photoshop. So let me show you how to make one. They're really easy. So let's go back to my model tab here, and the first things first, we got to start with the selection. We need to create a material group for every type of material on our object. Okay, now I have three major types of materials. I have the metal bands, I have the wood planks, and then I have the rivets. So I'm going to start by selecting some polygons on my metal bands, because that's going to be the easiest. Just select the front faces here. And once I got just a couple polygons in the row selected, I'll hit the L key to loop the selection and hold down the Shift key and up arrow to expand that selection by one row of polygons at a time. I'm just going to double check to make sure I have everything selected that I want, all the polygons that comprise the metal bands, and it looks like I've done a pretty good job here. Yep. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to hit the M key for material and create a new material called metal bands. There we go. It doesn't matter what color we make it. There we go. Because the color information is going to be generated by the surface ID render output. And here's kind of a good habit that I've gotten into. Whenever I apply a material to a series of polygons, as soon as I'm done, I hide those polygons just to ensure I don't apply two materials to the same polygons. It also makes this easy. It also makes it easier for us to select the other polygons. So there's just the wood plank polygons. We'll make this wood. There we go. Let's hide those guys, and what we're left with is, of course, just the rivets, and we'll give the rivets their own material group as well. Let's unhide the rest of the geometry, and this part is done. So let's jump over to our render tab and check out what we've done. Now, if you analyze the shader tree, you can very easily see that we have the rivets, the wood, and the metal band material group already placed inside the shader tree. We need to change one thing, and that's the render output. The default render outputs in Modo are going to be the alpha output and the final color output. I've eliminated my alpha output render output, and I now just have the final color left, and I need to change this. I don't want the final color render output. I want the surface ID render output. Now, to do that, it's real easy. Just right click on the effect column, and down at the bottom of this list, there's going to be an option called surface ID. If you look at the preview window, you can kind of already start to see what we're going to be building here. We're going to create a texture map that preserves all of this color information in this one render pass on that texture map. Each material in our shader tree gets assigned a very specific color, and the computer does this for us. If you analyze the materials in each one of these material groups, you can see that the rivets material is white. So it's showing up red over here, so the computer is assigning this red value to this material group. It's analyzing the materials in my shader tree, and it's assigning each material its own color in the render output, which is really cool. This is going to help us select colors and make layer masks inside of Photoshop really, really easily. Now, before we get started with baking, there's a couple things that we need to check. First and foremost, whenever we bake an image out of Modo, it's considered a camera operation. So the size of our image map is completely dependent on the frame height and frame width of our render settings. So we need to change some things. Let's go to the render settings and the frame tab over here on the right. We need to make sure that the frame width and the frame height matches the texture resolution of our Photoshop document. In my case, I'm creating a texture map that's 1024 by 1024. So I'm just going to change those two values to be 1024 pixels by 1024 pixels. Now the second thing that we need to do is that we need to ensure that the appropriate UV map is selected and highlighted. So I'm going to go to my Lists tab, and I already have mine highlighted. Here's my UV map. It's called Barrel High, and I need to make sure that this is selected. By selecting the UV map, we're telling the computer which set of UV islands to draw the pixels onto, okay, to bake the image onto. So we've got to have this selected. So now that we have our frame height and width set and our UV map selected, we can bake our first image. If we go to the top of the screen where it says render and choose bake to render outputs, it's going to bake out an image map onto that UV map right here. There it is, and it goes pretty fast. And if you look very carefully what's happened here, it's analyzed this barrel high UV map, and it's taken all of that color information from the render output, and it's created a texture map that perfectly matches and follows our UV islands. This is exactly what we want. Let's save this guy. I'm just going to save it out as a target, and let's call this Surface ID, and we'll save it right on my desktop and hit save. There we go. Let's get out of here and jump over into Photoshop, where I have begun to flush out my texture map for this wine barrel. As you can see from my my Photoshop document here, I have a pretty good start already. I made some wood planks in the background. That was easy. But now I'm to the point where I need to start adding the texture information for the metal bands and for the rivets. So this is a great opportunity for us to use surface IDs, because we need to very, very accurately, and accuracy is the key word in this, be able to mask out layer 16 to match the location of all of the metal band UV islands. Now I can guess, I have a pretty good idea just by looking at the UV islands where those metal bands should go, but I don't want to guess. I want to be pixel perfect in all of this. So using the Surface ID texture map is going to help us. It's going to help us get that pixel perfection, if you will. So layer 16, this little image right here, is going to be the texture that I'm going to use for my metal bands. Layer 36, this guy over here, is going to be the texture I'm going to use for my rivets. Let me show you a great little trick on how to import in a layer, import in an outside layer into your current Photoshop document. I want to import in that Surface ID pass that I just saved out of Modo and have it be placed just right here in this Photoshop document. Well, we could go File, Open, and then drag and drop layers from one document to another, but I don't want to do that. There's this great little option called Place, which is going to import in that Surface ID pass, and let's just find it. There we go. It's just going to place it in my scene. Now we have to be careful. I'm going to make sure that it's just lined up perfectly here. Looks like mine's down a little bit, and there it is. It just snapped. Now I'm pretty confident that all the layers match and line up with each other. So I'm going to hit the little check mark in the upper right hand corner to confirm the edit. There it is. And let's just double check to make sure that this layer is in fact in its correct position in my Photoshop document. I'm just going to turn down the opacity and just compare the location of the UV islands underneath. Yep, everything looks really good, so I'm going to consider that the Surface ID is perfectly placed within my Photoshop document. Now, we need to be able to select one specific color. Okay, I want to be able to select the yellow color in here and use that selection as a mask for my metal bands. Now these yellow pixels in here represent the polygons that I selected over in Modo. So I know that I perfectly selected all the polygons that make up the metal bands in Modo, so I can extrapolate and determine that all of the yellow pixels in this texture map match perfectly to their corresponding polygons over in Modo. Now we could use the traditional marquee selection tools and go in here and just kind of guess, but that's a lot of work. I would like the computer just to select one specific color, and if we use the magic wand tool, the computer will go in. Photoshop is pretty smart. and it's going to select in Photoshop the color that I click on here in my texture map. So I want to click on this yellow, and notice that it selected all of the pixels in this image that have that exact same shade of yellow, and I mean that exact same shade of yellow, which is kind of cool. So this makes making layer masks really easy, because now all the guesswork's been done. I only have to do one click. Let's turn off Surface ID, go down to layer 16, and apply a layer mask to this metal band texture. To apply a layer mask, it's really easy. You select the layer that you want to apply the mask to, and you hit this button right here. It's the button right next to FX. And let me turn the layer on, and look at that. Now this layer has been perfectly masked to the selection, so I know beyond any reasonable doubt that these metal bands, this layer matches perfectly to the polygons that I created over in Modo. So using the Surface ID pass is a great way to easily select the appropriate pixels in our texture maps, and it just takes away all the guesswork. I like that. So we're going to do it one more time. Turn on my Surface ID. I'm going to select the pixels that represent the bolts. There it is. And let's turn it off. Let's go to layer 36. Let's turn this guy on. And we're going to do the exact same thing. Just click on the layer mask button. And there it is. Mission accomplished. Now I know beyond any reasonable doubt that all of these features, the metal bands, the bolts, the location of the wood planes, match perfectly with the model over in Modo. There's no question on whether or not I accurately hit the correct UV islands with my texture information. So the Surface ID pass out of Modo is a wonderful addition to our texturing tool set. I think you're going to find it extraordinarily useful. I've been using it for a long time, and it's kind of my go-to guy when I need to place a whole bunch of specific texture information on one ginormous UV island like I have here for my wine barrel. So that's Surface ID.